Let me take you to a courtroom where justice didn't just bend, it nearly broke. A black judge, mistaken for a clerk. A white cop, quick with his hands, slow with respect. One slap. That's all it took. Not to silence her, but to ignite a fire that would burn through an entire system. What happens when the woman you thought was powerless turns out to be the one holding the match? Stick around. Because this story doesn't whisper, it roars. The morning fog clung to downtown Jackson like a warning whispered across time. The city stirred with a familiar tension. Cars honked, heels tapped on rain-slicked sidewalks, and the thick scent of coffee mingled with the musk of damp stone. Outside the grand courthouse of Hinds County, crowds gathered as they did every day, lawyers in tailored suits, officers in pressed uniforms, and defendants clutching files like lifeline. Inside, Judge Delilah Rhodes entered quietly through a side hallway, absent her robe. At 62, with her silver hair pulled into a high, regal bun and eyes sharp enough to cut marble, she looked like no one's assistant, but was treated like one anyway. One young officer leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Probably records, maybe refreshments." She heard. She always heard. But Delilah said nothing. The courtroom buzzed in pre-hearing disorder. At the front stood Sergeant Wade Cutler, broad-shouldered, smirking, and barking orders with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the room. The case, a vandalism charge against a black teenager barely 16. Just another day, just another boy in chains. Delilah approached the table near the bench to review the case file. Cutler spotted her and sneered. "Who are you? You're not allowed back here." She didn't answer. Irritated by her silence, Cutler stormed across the room. And then, it happened. A crack echoed through the marble chamber. His open palm struck her face. Time stopped. A pen dropped. A journalist gasped. Even the ceiling fans seemed to still. Delilah turned, slowly, eyes locked onto Cutler. Not with rage, but with a devastating calm. She climbed the bench. Only now did the room truly notice where she was headed. She adjusted the mic, and her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You just hit a judge, on record, with witnesses." Gasps spread like fire. The courtroom turned. Cutler paled. I didn't know," he stammered. "You weren't wearing your—" "Suits don't command respect," she said, steel in her tone. "But disrespect will be recorded." Delilah ordered the hearing postponed, the courtroom sealed, footage preserved, and a formal statement taken from Sergeant Wade Cutler, charged with striking a sitting judge. No robe, no ceremony, just the truth, and a war ignited. Delilah stood at the kitchen counter of her modest North Midtown home, the house silent except for the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock. Her hand rested gently on her nephew Malik's shoulder as he finished his sandwich, his backpack still slumped by the door. He smiled up at her, unaware of the weight pressing on her chest. The red mark on her cheek had faded into a faint shadow, but its message remained etched deep. "If I stay quiet," she thought, eyes locked on Malik's reflection in the fridge door, "boys like him will grow up believing this is normal." That night, she filed an emergency report to the Department of Justice. By morning, Agent Naomi Cross arrived in Jackson. Her heels echoed against the courthouse tile as she stepped from a government SUV, a leather briefcase in one hand and determination in the other. Salt and pepper curls framed her face, unreadable behind tinted glasses. She didn't offer sympathy, only facts. "You didn't just touch a corrupt cop," Naomi said. "You knocked on a hornet's nest that's been humming for decades." Delilah said nothing, her gaze fixed on a school photo of Malik taped to the refrigerator. Naomi followed her eyes, then understood. Meanwhile, across town, Ada Brent Holloway read the DOJ memo with a clenched jaw. "Federal oversight? Already?" he hissed, slamming his laptop shut. He picked up the phone and dialed a private number. "She needs to be discredited," he said coldly. "Media first, quiet, fast." The voice on the other end didn't respond, only hung up. Back at the courthouse archives, Delilah unlocked a steel cabinet and retrieved a battered black notebook. Names, dates, case numbers. All handwritten, some smudged from time. It was 20 years of truths no one wanted to touch. She flipped the pages. Cutler, Holloway, Mallory, over and over. Leon Tate, ever silent and steady, helped her pull forgotten files from dusty shelves. Under a single yellow bulb they reviewed names that had been erased, voices never heard. How many more like them? Leon asked. Delilah didn't answer. Her eyes were full of storm. Later that night, she found a plain envelope slipped under her front door. No return address, just a photograph. Malik walking home from school. And beneath it, block letters screamed, "Stay in your lane." Delilah's hands trembled, but not from fear. She crumpled the photo slowly, deliberately, and looked out into the darkness. Her lane had just become a battlefield. The conference room at the DOJ's regional office in Jackson buzzed with quiet tension. Fluorescent lights cast a pale hue over a wall cluttered with printed case files, crime scene photos, and red thread lines looping between names. Delilah sat at the head of the table, Naomi Cross beside her, and attorney Francis Bell across, scrolling through a laptop. On screen, a digital map of corruption. Cutler's name popped up 12 times across different cases. 5 had missing evidence. Videos, audio files, police reports. 4 were prosecuted by ADA Holloway. All closed with remarkable speed. Francis leaned in. "This is more than coincidence. This is choreography." Naomi added, "And one case stands out." She pulled up the 2019 arrest of Darnell Rivers, a teenager who disappeared days after alleging Cutler assaulted him. The body cam footage? Deleted, but Naomi traced a remote login from an Atlanta IP address. Registered to Graywell Security Group. Delilah narrowed her eyes. They're not just erasing evidence. They're doing it from inside the law itself. Meanwhile, inside the Jackson holding facility, Cutler sat stiffly in a metal chair. The room chilled. The door opened. A man in a gray suit and thin glasses entered without a word. "Mr. Ford." He dropped a folder on the table. Inside, Delilah's house, a schedule of Malik's after-school route, floor plans. Cutler looked away, jaw clenched. This has gone too far. Ford's tone didn't waver. "You don't get to feel moral now, Sergeant. We protected you. Now it's your turn to protect us." Cutler didn't answer. That night, headlines exploded. Judge Delilah Rhodes, racial bias allegations surface, read the local press. An anonymous blog posted an old photo of Delilah marching at a civil rights rally. Twisted captions labeled her a radical, anti-police judge. Reporters crowded outside her lawn. Cameras, microphones, confusion, fear in Malik's eyes. Delilah knelt beside him. "They want to scare us. But we don't fight with fear, we fight with truth." Francis Bell launched a press conference at DOJ the next morning. Every smear was met with documented rebuttals. Naomi announced a public hearing. The law doesn't hide in shadows. It speaks in daylight. Delilah faced the crowd, calm and firm. "I'm not here to defend my name. I'm here to defend justice." Flashbulbs popped as she climbed the courthouse steps in slow motion. Tomorrow, Ada Holloway would stand where he thought he was safe, and Delilah would make sure the lights stayed on. The courtroom was no longer just a courtroom. Cameras lined the walls, microphones hovered above polished desks, and the entire state of Mississippi seemed to be watching. Delilah Rhodes entered, not in her robe, but in a sharp black blazer. Her presence steady, her face unreadable. She wasn't presiding, she was standing, and she had come to speak truth. At her request, the bailiff dimmed the lights. The screen came alive with footage from the courtroom days earlier. Wade Cutler's hand cutting across Delilah's face. Gasps rippled through the room. Millions of viewers saw what Cutler had hoped would stay buried. The slap echoed again, louder this time, not just through speakers, but through conscience. Agent Naomi Cross called 2 witnesses. First, a black woman who had been bruised and jailed after resisting a violent arrest. Then, a young Latinx man who limped to the stand, recounting how his face met Cutler's boot, and how his case closed when the body cam footage disappeared. Francis Bell handed over files, same prosecutor. ADA Brent Holloway, same disappearing act. Then came the money trail. Francis clicked through slides. Graywell Security had wired $250,000, 0 cents, to a judicial initiative fund. Weeks later, those funds resurfaced in a retainer check to Cutler's defense team. Is that coincidence? Delilah asked the room. Or is this what a privatized justice system looks like? Then the room tensed. Delilah turned to Holloway. The 2019 case. Who deleted the footage from that body cam? Holloway blinked. I don't recall. Delilah produced a recovered server log. Naomi's team had restored fragments. It showed a login. From the Ada's office. Holloway's name glowed like fire on the page. The gallery erupted. One attorney stood, shouting, "How long have we been lied to?" Cutler, seated nearby, dropped his head. Another officer whispered to a reporter, "They forced our silence. Not anymore." Chief Judge Everett Mallory entered, flanked by aides. "For the dignity of the court, I suggest we end this hearing." Delilah didn't flinch. "Sir, you once told me to follow the law no matter where it led. Today, it led here." Outside, applause thundered. Delilah walked down the courthouse steps into the sun. Not above the people, but among them. A woman once underestimated, now standing taller than the system she dared to expose. The fluorescent hallway of the Federal Detention Center in Jackson felt colder than usual. Wade Cutler shuffled forward, wrists bound in steel, eyes vacant. The man who once barked orders in courtrooms now moved like a shell, silent, disarmed. His fingers trembled, not from fear of prison, but from the stark realization that the shield he'd worn for years, his uniform, his connections, his silence, had finally cracked. Meanwhile, Delilah Rhodes entered the federal grand jury chamber without her robe. No longer the judge, she took the stand as a citizen, a witness, a woman who had refused to be quiet. Her voice, calm but unwavering, carried across the room. "I stood up not because I was above the law," she said, looking each juror in the eye, "but because I refused to live beneath it." No one dared breathe. There was no need for flourish. Her truth filled the silence like thunder. Some jurors blinked back tears. Even the court reporter paused for a fraction of a second, her fingers hovering over the keys. The dominoes began to fall. Within hours, ADA Brent Holloway submitted his resignation. His name, once whispered with authority, now flooded headlines with shame. "Prosecutor who protected Cutler steps down," one banner read. But the bigger tremor came when Chief Judge Everett Mallory, Delilah's former mentor, was suspended. Video clips resurfaced of him praising her years earlier. "Delilah Rhodes is the future of this court." Now that quote reappeared under a different headline. "The future that exposed the past." The Justice Department wasted no time. A formal investigation was launched into the entire Jackson Police Department. 147 closed cases involving Cutler or his associates were frozen for review. A special task force, made up of DOJ representatives, public defenders, citizen activists, and federal monitors, was assembled to oversee systemic reform. At a press conference, Francis Bell summed it up best. "This isn't about bringing one man down, it's about lifting an entire city up." Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered. Not in protest, but in relief. The sound wasn't shouting, it was applause. A moment of justice had taken shape. Inside, Delilah sat quietly in a side room, the day's weight in her bones, her eyes soft but unbroken. For the first time in years, she let herself exhale. The system had cracked, and sunlight was pouring through. The morning sun broke through the blinds in Delilah's kitchen, casting long golden lines across the counter. She stood still, phone in hand, reading the email twice just to be sure. "Congratulations, Malik Rhodes has been selected for the Mississippi Young Legal Scholars Program." Her lips curled into a quiet smile, the first real one in weeks. A soft shuffle behind her. Malik, still in pajamas, rubbed his eyes and looked up. "I'm not scared anymore, Auntie," he whispered, wrapping his arms around her waist. Outside Hinds County Courthouse, the crowd had already gathered. Hundreds stood on the marble steps, holding handmade signs that cut through the morning fog. justice for all, or justice for none. They weren't chanting, they were waiting. For her. Delilah emerged not in a robe but a black suit. No gavel, no bench, just a thick manila folder in her hand. The compiled indictment of a broken system. Cameras whirred, news anchors whispered into mics. Time itself seemed to pause. She stood before the crowd, looked into the sea of expectant eyes and said, "I resign, not in defeat, but in fulfillment. Because true justice does not cling to a seat, it moves with the people." Behind her, Frances Bell's eyes glistened. Naomi placed a quiet hand on her shoulder. A silence fell, not from confusion but reverence. Then the headlines hit the wires. The judge who chose the fire. Weeks later, a wooden sign creaked gently in the breeze. Justice for all, Eagle Square Legal Hub. Inside the modest classroom, Delilah stood before a small circle of young students, chalk in hand, walking them through the Equal Protection Clause like she once walked a courtroom. Naomi leaned against the back wall, arms crossed and proud. Leon Tate passed out handouts. Malik sat front row, eyes wide with focus. A small Latinx girl raised her hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Rhodes, can someone like me become a judge too?" Delilah walked over, crouched to her level, and smiled. "Not only can you, you must. And you'll do it better than I ever did." The children nodded, scribbling notes. Outside, the sun continued rising. The courtroom was no longer her battlefield, but the future? That was still hers to shape. Justice isn't just about laws, it's about the courage to confront what's broken and the wisdom to rebuild what's fair. Systems don't change on their own. People do that. With truth, resilience, and a voice that refuses to stay silent. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, share your perspective, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak truth to power.